My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. We all have negative feelings and emotions from time to time. Sometimes they are easy to process and let go, and other times they seem to linger and prevent us from living fully and freely. What if there were simple steps you could take to clear those destructive and inhibiting feelings like fear, anger, and hurt out of your body? What if it were as simple as setting a self-cleaning emotional oven? My guest this evening, Dr. Deborah Sandella, uses cutting-edge neuroscience techniques and her revolutionary regenerating images memory technique, or RIM technique, to show how blocked feelings prevent us from creating the life that we would choose. Dr. Deb has helped thousands of people for more than 40 years and is an award-winning psychotherapist and university professor. She joins us tonight to share her revolutionary technique, which she writes about in her brand new book, Goodbye, Hurt and Pain, 7 Simple Steps for Health, Love, and Success. Welcome, Dr. Deb.
Yes. Hi, Victor. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And thank you so much for joining us. So let's start out with your personal experience and how that helped you evolve your understanding of emotion. You actually had a situation bringing your dad back from the brink of death. How did that influence your understanding of emotion?
Well, yes, it really changed my life in really many ways. This was back in 1995, and I got a call from my brother late in the night that my dad had a cardiac arrest, that he was in ICU, and that the nurses wanted a agreement to not resuscitate because his blood pressure wasn't holding, and they had tried all the medication. Nothing was keeping his blood pressure up, and they did not expect him to survive to the next morning. And I had this really very strange reaction because I started out my career as a nurse. And so, of course, I could understand their request, but somehow my immediate reaction was an intuitive response, and I felt very angry that they were even asking us this. And I said no. And so, at that point, I hung up the phone, intending to go back to Southeast Kansas the next day. And as I walked back to bed, there came a spontaneous image or vision, whatever you want to call it, but it was in my head very strongly. And I could see my dad walking off to the horizon with his back to me. And there I was yelling and screaming at him how angry I was that he was leaving, because I really wasn't ready, that I had so many more things I wanted to do with him. And then all of a sudden he paused. And he turned around and looked at me, and he had such a gentle look on his face. It was one I had never seen before. And he said, "Oh, okay, babe. I didn't know you felt that way." And in that moment, I'm thinking, well, this is all in my head, right? But the emotion of anger just drained out of my body. And in fact, I felt kind of like a loose noodle. And as I went to bed, I just kept his image with me all night long. It felt like I needed to keep this link to him. And in the morning when I flew to Kansas and I walked in, they said, well, sometime in the middle of the night, his blood pressure had started to hold. And the epilogue is that he survived that experience and lived 5 more years. The years that he and my mom said were the very best years of their lives. It was like having a second chance. And so all of this really confronted my background as a nurse, all I had learned in medicine, all I had learned in psychiatric nursing and beyond. And so it caused me to really rethink things both personally and professionally.
Now, did your dad actually have a near-death experience, and do you believe that you were actually in contact with him?
Well, he didn't have a full memory of it. I would say I experienced it for him in a conscious way. When he did, like I flew back after I was there, I stayed several weeks because he was unconscious when I arrived. And they intentionally wanted him to be unconscious for his recovery. And when he came to consciousness, I was there and I was beside his bed. And he just said to me, somebody's been watching over me during this time. And was it you? It feels like it was you. And that was really and he was still in and out of awareness. He wasn't fully back into this world. So that was really the most that he ever talked about it. So it felt to me like, we had always been very, very close. It felt to me like I had access to his experience, and that it completely changed my life so that there was benefit for both of us.
Now, prior to that event, did you ever have any type of empathic or psychic experience?
Well, I've always been intuitive, Victor. I did have another experience with him. I'm trying to remember now. I can't remember. I think it was later. Yeah, it was later that I had an experience with my dad where I was sending him a postcard because we were traveling. And instead of writing, "Dear Dad," I unconsciously wrote "Dead Dad."
Ooh.
And, and it totally, again, really caught my attention. It was like, oh my gosh, what does this mean? And so I immediately called and talked to my parents. And what had just happened, like, I don't know if it was exactly that day, but just very near that time, was that he had been evaluated for surgery. And they had said that he was a walking time bomb because of some cardiac, the way that he was having, where the innervation moves through the heart, that he was having erratic heart rate. And that he had occlusions that needed open heart surgery, really. And so I would say, well, and then the other thing, you can tell my dad and I were very close because I also, in high school, I woke up, I was a senior in high school, and at the time he was working 2 jobs and so was really overextended. And I woke up crying in the middle of the night because I had dreamed that he had died. And the next day he had a heart attack. Now this was this was long before the 1995 experience. So I guess you could say I was psychically connected with him or empathic with him during his life.
I don't like to use the word psychic, but empathic, intuitive, in touch with the energetic realm since I was a very young child. And I remember one specific incident when I was in Korea. I was in Korea in 1975. I was in the United States Air Force at the time. And I remember sitting down one morning and thinking to myself, there's something wrong with my mother. And I had no indication. I had no writing, no letters. Nothing had come indicating there was anything wrong. And I called the phone, and I reached out, and my mother and sister picked up the extension simultaneously. I said, "Mom, what's wrong?" And my sister gasped, and she goes, "How did he know?" And she was actually scheduled to go in for a extensive surgical procedure the next day.
Wow, yes.
Which she survived, but she was actually beaming out that information to me, and I picked up on it and responded and connected with it and reassured her that she would be fine. And in fact, she was fine after the procedure was over. So you said your dad had passed 5 years after that period in 1995. How did you process the feeling of his passing at that point with the additional years that you were given?
Well, it was really interesting because it was, there was some similarities to where I was and the way I approached it as to the first time, but it felt like all of the signs. So when it happened the first time, there was just no ambivalence on my part. I knew this was not I just was going to keep him here. He wasn't going to go. Mm-hmm. And so all along there would be little signs that would tell me, yes, stay with this, stay with this. Like when I sat with him in the hospital during the night and began to imagine for him that his lungs were clearing, because I could sense, just through imagination, I could just sense his body was very heavy, and especially his lungs. And so I started to breathe for him, imagining breathing in clear blue, sky blue air, oxygen into his lungs, and the darkness being exhaled. And what happened was the next morning, the pulmonologist came in to evaluate him and said, well, actually, his lungs look really good. And there's just, oh, this was the other piece I forgot to mention. So I really saw, it getting lighter and lighter till everything was clear except this very dark spot at the bottom of his lungs, which just seemed immovable as I was doing this. And so in the morning when the pulmonologist came in, he said his lungs look really good, except that he has some aspirated material at the very bottom that I need to remove. And so he did. Which was wonderful. And then, of course, he cautioned me and said, don't get your hopes up, because even though your dad's lungs are okay now, he was without oxygen for a very long time before he was resuscitated. So he's probably got brain damage. Mm-hmm. However, what happened is he came back without brain damage.
Wow. And you actually linked with him and helped him breathe.
Yes. Yes. It's one of those moments, and you probably felt this somewhat with your mom, but it was like at that time I really was an academic. I had an advanced degree. I was doing research. I was teaching part-time at the University of Colorado, and also had a psychotherapy practice. And none of what I was experiencing connected with this professional background.
Absolutely.
It was like, whoa, this is way beyond what I know educationally. And, my dad's life was more important to me than any of that.
Absolutely.
So I just set it all aside, and I said, I'll do anything. I'll do whatever it takes. And I don't really care.
Absolutely.
And, I didn't really care after that. I felt there was something so important I had experienced here about healing that I didn't know about, that I actually ended up closing my psychotherapy practice and moving in this new direction, really of discovery to try and sort this out.
And we're going to discuss how that event affected you and made you make that move when we come back after these messages on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Circle of Hearts Radio is a sanctuary on the airwaves. Join me, Grandmother Elia, in the circle on Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern, as I share information to both enlighten and nourish your soul.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Buffett. How would you like to meet an endangered manatee? You can by joining Save the Manatee Club's Adopt the Manatee program. You can't take them home, but you can get to know your new manatee friend through the photo, biography, and information the club sends to you. And you can read updates on your manatee in the club newsletter. More importantly, your contribution goes to programs that are working to save manatees from extinction. It's easy to help. Call 1-800-432-JOIN.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest tonight, Dr. Deb Sandella, author of the new book, Goodbye Hurt and Pain, 7 Steps for Health, Love, and Success. So, Dr. Deb, before the break, you were talking about the experience with your dad and how it changed your sense of feelings and emotions. How did it actually change? What manifested for you that led you to the work that you're doing now?
Right. Well, personally, from a very personal perspective, it caused me to really evaluate how I was being with the people I loved, that my dad would respond in such a way that, he didn't know I would totally want him to be around. And so I really paused and realized how fast I was moving that I was very busy with the family, work, all of this. So it caused me to really evaluate and reprioritize that. So professionally, oh my God, it just, it made me like compelled. I was like so compelled by this experience that I wanted to know how it had happened so I could recreate it for intentional healing. And it was clearly something very different than anything I had learned. So it sent me on this journey.
Now, you say you don't need to talk about your feelings, and every talk therapist in existence is saying, what is she talking about? Isn't this the way most people deal with feelings? How can this be?
Well, you are right. This is the way most people deal with feelings because it's what we have learned throughout, especially contemporary history, ever since psychology has been around. Because there's been some confusion between thoughts and feelings. And so we have made this assumption that thoughts are feelings or that thoughts access feelings. And actually, that is not true. And it's now, with the very current neuroscience, is being found to be true that it is not, that thoughts and feelings are different. So thoughts happen in the left brain and feelings happen in the right creative brain. And so the left brain just doesn't know how to do feelings. It gets very frustrated by feelings because its job is very logical and linear and analytic, and feelings just don't work that way. So the left brain gets very frustrated that feelings feel invisible, out of control, and having a life of their own. So they can't be, we can't control them. So that frustrates the left brain because it likes to have control, measurement, all of that. Now, the right brain actually has a completely different language than the left brain. And the right brain language is nonverbal, symbolic, sensory, like real physical body sensory and emotional. So images, metaphors, feelings, body sensations, all of this is how the right brain communicates. So if we want to actually understand what's happening with our feelings, we have to use the language of the right brain in order to appreciate what is going on.
Now, you say that feelings have form. That's what you're talking about here, correct?
Right, exactly. So what I have learned through these last 20 years that has been total discovery of attempting to understand how all of this works, because it hasn't been really understood, is how to use the right brain language to access feelings. And so what happens is feelings are stored in the body. So feelings are actually a body experience, and then the body experience is transmitted to the mind, which gives it words and understanding. And sometimes the story that the mind makes up is accurate, and sometimes it isn't, because the mind also, it does have a mind of its own of how it makes sense of things. So it's not always right on, but it will always, the left brain compulsively must create a story so that we feel like we're smart and we're safe and we know what's happening. However, that can be misleading. So when we use the body, so when we start to, first of all, close our eyes. So the fastest way to shift from the left brain to the right brain is to close the eyes so that the looking goes from external stimuli to internal stimuli. And when we do that, we can start to sense through our body what's calling our attention. And as we ask the imagination, so imagination is the translator for what is happening in the unconscious, which is stored in the body. So we ask imaginations to start giving it form, size, shape, color. And it then starts to have its own compelling journey of following those clues that we sense through the body. And then as we actually see the form, then the left brain comes on board and we start having whole brain function.
So the left brain is basically Mr. Spock, and the right brain is a combination of Dr. McCoy and Captain Kirk, right?
Correct.
Basically, we're
You've
saying,
got it.
okay, all right. Now, let's do an example here. Let's say that I stub my toe. And obviously, I get this sharp shooting pain coming up my leg and my foot, and I'm upset with myself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what is my left brain doing with that? And what is my right brain doing with that?
Well, first of all, the emotion of your visceral response happens in the body, and it could be different for different people. So it may be that you're angry, and what you're angry about may not be really known, but it's just raw anger is the first response, like, darn it, I don't like this. And so that could be the very first response that goes to the brain. And then the brain starts to make up a story, I should say the left brain, starts to make a story about who you're angry with and who's at fault and all of that. And now another response could be to be angry with the self. Like, how come I didn't see that? Oh, darn, I'm so clumsy. So it all, the story gets made up based on experiences we've had, patterns of emotion that we continue to replay. Because one of the things that I've learned very clearly, and it's also now substantiated in the science, is that when we have a very intense emotional experience that does not get consciously processed, then it sticks, it kind of gets stuck in the body. That old phrase, stuck in the craw, is how I think of it, that it gets stuck in the body. And so now it is invisible. It's no longer conscious. It's invisible. And it starts to have a magnetic ability to attract similar experience, because it is like having a video that's on pause, where that moment keeps getting replayed in the background. And we start consistently interpreting new experience as being similar, yet that may or may not be true. So we have this kind of proclivity to start interpreting new experience where we're victimized or we're angry or all of these kinds of feelings that can get stuck related to a past experience.
We're going to dig deeper into stuck memories and stuck feelings in the next segment. But let's talk about daydreaming helping us solve emotional issues. How does daydreaming help?
Right. Well, what has been so wonderful, Victor, is that over these 20 years, I have learned again and again and again, because I actually set aside what I expected or what I'd been taught to be possible or not possible. I have learned from allowing whatever shows up in the client to receive it and allow it and encourage it, that I've learned that we have an organic emotional system that is actually very smart. And so when we access what is there, it can start to automatically change. And one of the ways we can access it is through daydreaming, or in sciences, they're now calling that mind wandering, which means that we're just kind of allowing whatever wants to happen in our mind to happen, which is different, by the way, than avoidant fantasy, where we're trying to avoid reality. That's a different thing. So I want to be very clear about that. But it's more of that just relaxing and allowing the creative parts of our brain to bring together different things that are known and different experiences in some new creative way, so that we gain insight, and it's just amazing, honestly. And so what happens is our creative problem-solving ability significantly increases in some research by 40%.
Is daydreaming akin to meditation?
Yes, I would say it is, because meditation would be intended daydreaming, right, depending on the kind of meditation that you do. But in terms of the kind of meditation I've always been drawn to, which is basically to allow whatever wants to happen, it is intended. It is intended daydreaming or mind wandering.
It's interesting because a lot of the great scientists and philosophers have talked about how they had a problem in mind and they sort of daydreamed, perhaps meditated, and then the solution became very apparent to them.
Right, that's exactly right. In fact, there are several, and I can't even remember right now who, but mathematicians and also, creators of music. I'm trying to think, composers
Yes.
that have had answers arrive in dreams, or they've been awakened in the middle of the night with a immediate answer, because during the night, that is the ultimate daydreaming, because our left brain logic is completely turned off. In daydreaming, we will probably have a little bit more logic still registering, so that we, are conscious of what our experience is in. But in night dreaming, there's very little logic that is exercised. It's very minimal. And so that actually is the epitome of the ultimate daydreaming. And you're right. Great inventors have had awareness and insights come in, answers to great problems just pop in.
They used to refer to it, I believe Einstein was a pipe smoker, and they used to refer to these as pipe dreams, where they'd be sort of smoking their pipe. Now, I'm not advocating the use of tobacco, the dangers in that, but they'd be smoking their pipe and contemplating an idea, and that idea would visualize and become visceral and manifest for them in their minds.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I've never heard that story, so thank you for sharing that.
Our guest, Dr. Deb Sandella, author of the new book, Goodbye, Hurt and Pain, 7 Simple Steps for Health, Love, and Success. Dr. Deb, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Yes, well, the book, Goodbye, Hurt and Pain, as you said, is available anywhere you can buy a book. And it's online through Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. It's in independent bookstores. It's really everywhere. And if you would like to purchase the book and also gain a bonus meditation that I've recorded that accompanies one of the suggested activities, you can go to the website goodbyehurtandpain.com. And when you purchase the book through those links, and it goes to all of those booksellers, that you can download the free meditation.
And we'll be back with Dr. Deb Sandella, author of the book Goodbye, Hurt and Pain, after these messages on the OMTimes radio network. Please stay tuned.
This is OTR FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Are you in an interfaith relationship and thinking of getting married? For 18 years, Reverend Laurie Sue Brockway has been creating personalized, loving, and romantic ceremonies for couples of all faiths and cultural backgrounds. Reverend Laurie Sue's sensitivity to the needs of interfaith couples is reflected in the compassionate and inclusive way she addresses the concerns of parents and families. Reverend Laurie Sue is also the author of several best-selling books on interfaith weddings and wedding vows. Selected as one of the top interfaith officiants by New York Magazine, Reverend Laurie Sue serves couples in the New York metropolitan area and beyond. Find out more at her website, yourinterfaithwedding.com.
As difficult as it is to believe, there are places in Africa where human traffickers sell albino children and their body parts for use in magic rituals. Humanity Healing International is actively working in Uganda to change this paradigm. The Albino Rescue Project finds albino children who are at risk and places them in safe schools and environments where they can learn and grow free from fear. To learn more or to sponsor a child, visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this evening, Dr. Deb Sandella, author of the new book, Goodbye, Hurt and Pain, 7 Simple Steps for Health, Love, and Success. So we were talking before about this concept of daydreaming to get in touch and help us solve with our emotional issues, rather. You say feelings are actually more important than we think. Why?
Well, so what happens is when we don't process feelings, so the way we're designed physiologically, the connection between the mind and the body is so intricately interwoven that every second we have a feeling passing through our body. And it's called interoception. And the problem is if we try to stop that. So let's say, when the feelings are good, we usually are fine with the feelings passing through, and we're all okay with that without even realizing it. And we're not usually in tune with all those feelings that are passing through because we're not tuned into ourselves or into our body. We're more tuned into our left brain and being in the external world and navigating it. And so when we have a feeling that we don't like a lot of people have an issue with being angry. So when they have a body experience of anger pass through, if we are uncomfortable with it and we try to stop it, resist it, control it, bury it, forget it, all of that, what happens is it sticks around. It's like, I call it the river of emotion that flows through us. Mm-hmm. And when we resist it, it's like building a dam. And so when we build a dam, just like the metaphor of a river, when you build a dam, then the water, the emotional waters that we're not wanting, we actually cause to stick around. And when that sticks around, it goes underground into the body, into the unconscious, and then it's impacting us and leaking out indirectly without us having any awareness of it. So it causes us to act and speak and behave and decide in ways we're not really aware of how it is sabotaging. For instance, with passive aggressiveness, we've heard that term before. So that's what happens in passive aggressiveness. When anger, people don't feel okay with anger, so it goes underground. They don't even realize that they're angry, but it shows up everywhere to other people around them because it's indirect now. It's like leaking out. So if we do not pay attention to our feelings, tune into them, allow them, because they actually are intended. So the whole purpose of feelings is to a transient state of awareness that is received and passes through us to bring us information that helps keep us safe. So if we resist it, then we also are not gaining the information about safety in the world that is coming to us through our body. The same way we get we get information through our body physically. Like if it's too cold, to not have a coat on, then our body lets us know it's time to put a coat on. Well, our emotional operating system has a similar process. We just haven't looked at it in that way.
So what you're saying is that anger is actually, when processed properly, anger is good. Exactly.
That's exactly right. Because anger brings us feedback. I think of it as a personal security alarm. Mm. And so like when you have an alarm system in your home or your office and it goes off, most are false alarms. However, you do not know until you investigate and sort it out. And so if you ignore an alarm, you could be in danger and you won't know it. Mm. And if you assume every alarm is accurate and you're really in danger, you're going to be in great anxiety and distrust of what is around you. And so to be able to receive the anger, understand it, and it is a body experience, so we have to allow our body to express it in some way initially so that we can calm down enough to be able to actually understand and investigate, is there a violation? Am I in danger either in ways that I'm looking at things internally or with the people around me? So that we know then what action, if any, is indicated to be safe.
I think that's an important point because allowing the body to process anger viscerally. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if we didn't have a body to process the anger, what would happen to our brain? It would probably explode.
Oh, exactly. That's a great visual. And I totally agree with you.
Now, a lot of our listeners would define themselves as having tremendous amounts of empathy, but you say there's trouble with excessive empathy. What's that?
Right. Well, I'm very aware of it because I was initially trained as a nurse, and we're taught to be very empathic, and people who are very empathic are drawn to nursing. And what I have discovered as a professional myself and now teaching other people to be able to administer REM to people who have been traumatized is that when we're empathic, the real definition of being empathic is to stand in the shoes of another person and feel their feelings so you understand them. Well, what happens is when we stand in the shoes of another person who's actually traumatized, if we are vulnerable, we can take on that trauma in our body, in our emotions, and then we become wounded until we process it for ourselves, and then we're not very available to help the other person if we're struggling with our own feelings. And so some of the new research actually out of the Boston Marathon bombing showed that people developed some levels of PTSD just from watching the media relative to that event, and that it increased with the number of hours being watched, and that people who had previous trauma were more vulnerable to that.
Very interesting. And a lot of people, a lot of healers in particular, who are new to healing or are truly empathic, have a great deal of difficulty because after giving or administering spiritual healing or channeling spiritual healing for another, they sometimes start manifesting physical symptoms themselves. And this is what you're talking about.
Right, that's exactly right. Because what's happened is the boundary between the two people now has become blurred. Because the healer is imagining being that person in some way so that they can heal, so that it can have its very negative side effects. So that I have been very careful in training REM facilitators to be compassionate rather than empathic. So, for instance, the REM process of facilitation is oriented around facilitating the person's own system to kick in, bring answers, and to really process memories so that the facilitator's not doing it themselves or even feeling it themselves for that client.
Now, we sort of touched upon this in the second part of our interview tonight. What makes some memories stick in memory even after the causal event is resolved?
Right. Oh, I have been so fascinated by this, Victor, because as a psychotherapist, I didn't expect this. However, over the last 20 years, I see it frequently, that a feeling that was very intense, and the more intense the emotion at the original event, the more sticky it is, and that it's never been acknowledged and dealt with, then it sticks around even though the problem itself has resolved. So, for instance, I remember a woman who had a memory come up that was very traumatic, where she remembered when her boyfriend that she really cared about broke up with her. However, that had all resolved, and they were married, and they were having a happy marriage. And yet this memory, she actually had some cancer, and it was very related to healing that cancer, this memory was. And so it's just fascinating that emotion does have a life of its own in the body if the conscious mind isn't involved in helping process it.
You know, it's fascinating. I was involved in a group healing session many years ago of a woman who had ovarian cancer. And in the process of scanning her, and for those of our listeners who don't know, I've been a Reiki master since the early 90s. In the process of scanning her, two names kept coming up to me, and I didn't know anything about her other than her first name. And I said, "Do these names mean anything to you?" And she said, "Yes, that's my husband and my son." And I said, "What does it mean that I'm feeling this there?" She says, "I've always felt abandoned by them." And what she did was she took that sense of abandonment, internalized it, made it visceral, and wound up with ovarian cancer. And it was amazing that she was able to identify and connect with that.
Right. Oh, that is so right. And I think, a lot of people, once they're allowed to actually, see that there's a connection between a repetitive, intense, bad feeling that they've had in their life and a connection to some medical problem, they can really start doing great work. And I've seen it a lot. Similar to your experience, I've worked with many people who have a physical problem that when we, go back into the body and ask for the origin of that medical problem, they go back to very intense, exact experience of feeling traumatized psychologically, or having emotion that feels traumatizing at a particular moment in time in their life.
So how do we free ourselves of stuck negative feelings?
Well, I think that the very first thing we've already referred to is to allow ourselves to tune into our feelings moment to moment to moment as much as possible, and allow them continue to flow so that we'll receive whatever feelings come, even if we don't like them, and to keep that flow going and to really receive what is the insight here. So that's number one. The second thing, and I would say that, I think of it as to breathe, to really feel your feelings as best as you can. And then to actually, as you sense the feeling, to sense where in your body you are having any kind of energetic something happening there. Go in, move into it and express whatever energy is there, whatever the feeling in that place in your body that you sense, to just give it an expression. You can just write it down spontaneously, whatever comes, because it's really the lack of expression that keeps the emotions stuck.
And we'll be back with Dr. Deb Sandella and more of her wonderful work, Goodbye Hurt and Pain, 7 Simple Steps for Health, Love, and Success, after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Have you ever wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free today at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
This is Terry Van Horn, and I want to invite you to join me for my weekly radio show, Healing Light, on OMTimes Radio every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Healing Light, we want to bring love, light, and blessings into your world. You can find out more about us at www.healinglightonline.com. Blessings.
Hey America, we need to have a little talk. We've got more food than we know what to do with in this country, yet 17 million kids in America are struggling with hunger. Makes no sense. Luckily, the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks has volunteers gathering excess food and getting it to hungry kids. They're kind of like food angels. Hey, become a food angel yourself by supporting Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org. We can't do it without your help. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Sylvia Henderson, intuitive life coach and energy healer. Are you ready to elevate and rise way above your normal? Be sure to listen to my show, Intuitive Transformations, on OMTimes Radio, Sunday evenings at 9 p.m. Eastern. Get the inspiration you need to transform your life.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
And And we're back on Destination Unlimited. My guest tonight, Dr. Deb Sandella, author of the great new book, Goodbye Hurt and Pain, 7 Simple Steps for Health, Love, and Success. And I just want to say that in the foreword of the book, there's a wonderful quotation. It says, "Wonderful and profound. This book will touch you intimately and probably change your life." And that comes from our friend Jack Canfield. So that's a wonderful endorsement from Jack.
Yes, thank you, Victor.
Now, we were talking about getting rid of stuck negative feelings, and you had mentioned, what's another simple thing we can do when we are stuck in a negative feeling?
Well, there's a couple of things that are so simple that it's just like, that we need to do quickly. And that is to reconnect with our body, because in our body sensing is where we actually connect with the fear response. So intellectually is not, the intellectual left brain response does not connect with the fear response. So we want to connect with where that fear response is coming from, our primitive brain, our reptilian brain. There's an alarm going off. That says danger, 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 And so the very first thing to do is to close your eyes and really focus on controlling your breathing. Because those two visceral activities really connect us with our nervous system more directly and take us out of our left brain down into the body so that it can calm the alarm very quickly and immediately. And there's lots of different breathing activities that people can do. One of the main things is breathing is an automatic response. However, we also can control it. So when we control breathing, we actually connect both our voluntary and involuntary nervous systems.
Now, what's the quickest way? We talked about an alarm situation, but being overwhelmed by an uncomfortable, not necessarily danger or anger, but being overwhelmed by uncomfortable emotions. What's a technique you can use to stop feeling overwhelmed?
Well, what I would say is I would still do the close your eyes and breathe first as an entree, because it'll help you then be able to just be in your body. Because otherwise we become a talking head and we're detached from our body. So once we're reconnected with our body, then you can ask your imagination for an image to appear just like that represents some insight about what is happening that will help us. And in that moment, we just receive whatever comes first, whatever image you're sensing. And it doesn't matter whether you see it as an actual picture or you just sense it or you hear a voice telling you what it is or you just know what is arriving. You just receive it, letting go of any edits without any intellectual evaluation or judgment. And it is amazing what can happen. Do we have time for a short story?
Please, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so for instance, I had a woman who was really overwhelmed with some dissonance or conflict that was arising in her new relationship with a boyfriend because she had just gone through a very painful divorce. And so we asked her imagination to call forth an image that represented this new relationship. And all of a sudden what she saw, the first thing, she immediately started laughing actually, because she saw her boyfriend standing, trying to balance and stand on a TV table. Mm-hmm. And so she goes, oh, this is what he's been trying to tell me, that I'm really making it impossible for him to live up to my expectations, that there's, these small little TV table and he has to stand on it. And she said, well, I think I have been so afraid of losing control again in a relationship because of the way that first marriage went, that I've not really allowed him to be fully present with me as who he is. I've really been wanting to control things so I feel safe, So then we asked for an image of what would be really the answer or the solution to this. And she immediately saw the two of them slow dancing on the dance floor. And then, I moved her into that image of herself and to imagine herself dancing with him in this way. So they were moving as one, and visibly her body relaxed. And she goes, oh, this feels so good. It feels safe. And so now she has this memory of moving with him and being one with him, allowing intimacy with him, and that it feels safe. And so 2 weeks later, she told me, 2 weeks later, he said, what happened to you? You are totally different. And so they're now engaged, actually. But it's just remarkable because when people receive that very visceral understanding, it's very easy for them to make changes.
So in essence, this is a great example of your RIM technique, regenerating a painful event with a new happy ending. That's what you're exactly doing.
Yes, it is. That's exactly right.
Talk a little bit more about RIM. How did you develop RIM?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I think after the experience with my dad, I was very disillusioned with the psychotherapy experience because it's very heady and intellectual. And, as a psychotherapist, it was hard because you hit your head up against all the intellectual defenses of the clients because that's the level you're dealing with. So I just set that aside completely and began to experiment with what I did know that would be accessing a couple of techniques that I was trained in as a psychotherapist to use adjunctively, that took you directly into the unconscious. And that was interactive guided imagery and Ericksonian hypnosis were a couple. And way back at that time, I mean, this was this was really when I started playing with those techniques. It was probably 30 years ago. I took a weekend with a therapist from New Zealand that was doing very early primitive form of what we probably now would call somatic therapy or somatic sensing. And so after I closed my psychotherapy practice, I just synthesized all of those and I began with that. And I didn't even charge. I just would do sessions for people that I ran into, a lot of friends actually, that were having experiences like they were having medical issues or going to have surgery or were having a breakup or whatever. And I just played with it to see how it worked. And as I played with it, and then I began to see results, I started to actually do paid sessions. And over the 20 years, it's like that really has evolved on its own. So the way RIM is now really has its own skills and it has its own philosophy that have developed during that time. And honestly, the way the skills developed was how I was intuitively called to respond to what showed up during a session. Because it's totally unplanned. And so it's a nonlinear process because we're following the client's unconscious. And so whatever imagery or sensation or experience shows up for them, then that's where we're going. And that's how I sensed how to respond and learned what worked and what didn't work as well.
Now, a lot of these feelings we're talking about start when we're children. What would you say is the most important thing that parents can teach their children about feelings?
Well, it's very, very important to allow your children to have their feelings, for them to cry and talk about their feelings without trying to talk them out of it or guilt them out of it or tickle them out of it. I remember when I was a kid, it was like, when I was mad, it was like, there would be a tickle, like getting you out of the madness, out of the anger. And instead, we want to really allow and encourage our children to have their feelings because this is their internal compass that can help them stay safe, and we want them to learn to trust it. Now, it doesn't mean we don't set limits. So just because a child is angry doesn't mean that child gets out of the limits. For instance, I remember my son when he was 11, it was like he was really getting, getting a sense of his own voice. And I remember him starting to scream angrily at me. And I said, well, it's okay for you to be angry and you'll need to do that in your room. And whenever you want to talk about what it is you're really angry about, then, we'll talk. And so he did. He went to his room and screamed and did whatever he wanted to, and that was all fine. So I wasn't upset with him doing that. And then when he was ready to talk, we actually talked about what the actual decision was, what the limit was that we had been discussing that he was angry about.
Wonderful. Sage advice from our guest, Dr. Deb Sandella, author of the new book, Goodbye, Hurt and Pain, 7 Simple Steps for Health, Love, and Success. Dr. Deb, please tell our listeners one more time how they can get your book and find out more about this amazing work.
Yes, thank you, Victor. Yeah, so the book is available wherever books are sold, whether that's bookstores or online at all of the vendors. And you can also gain a bonus audio meditation that goes with the book from my website when you go to goodbyehurtandpain.com. And you just turn in your invoice number no matter where you bought it. And you can claim that MP3 meditation, which is really nice to just get a feel of going deeper related to one of the activity sessions. And I might just mention that every chapter has practice activities for the reader to practice on their own, or they can do it with a group. It's a great book for a book club.
Wonderful. Dr. Deb, thank you so much for bringing this amazing book and your amazing technique to us. I think it's something so important, especially for listeners to this program who do work, quite frankly, with their emotions and with their feelings and empathy, and I think it's something that they can all gain from. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you, Victor. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. And I am Victor the Voice Furman. This is Destination Unlimited. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful week.